Hey guys, Darren Elias here, back to talk some more poker strategy and look at a couple hands from World Poker Tour final table that I played and actually won, this being a part of my back-to-back World Poker Tour wins. These hands coming from the WPT Caribbean final table. And to remind you guys, previewing the release of my upcoming poker tournament course with Upswing Poker, collaborating with Nick Petrangelo, and talking about a lot of different aspects of the game, and this video really focusing on how we play against different opponents, different player types, and how we're able to learn more from observing their patterns and make deviations in our play based on what we've seen and what we perceive our opponents to be doing with different parts of their range and choosing different bet sizes, things like that. So without further ado, we'll get into these hands. And the first two hands we're going to look at real quickly are laying the foundations for the third. And we have a big section on the course talking about observing opponents and collecting data. And that's really the foundation of, if you're going to play any kind of exploitative strategy where you're going to make deviations and adapt to what your opponents are doing, then we need to be watching them closely and watching how much they're betting with certain hands. And this final table actually live streams, so that helps to another level where we're able to see every hand and how they proceed with every hand and what sizes they choose, things like that. So this hand coming four-handed at the final table, we have Mike Linster here opening 6-4 suited in the cutoff. And villain in question here, this is player I ended up getting heads up against, recreational player. And if we're going to talk about player types, falling into the category 4 type, where in my poker course we have 5 different player types, and 2 of those being recreational players. The type 4, the looser recreational player, with most mistakes coming by playing too loose, mostly too passive, occasionally too aggressive, but making most of their errors on the loose side of things. And the type 5 player, the opposite, where they're the tighter recreational player, their errors coming and playing too tight in most spots. So this player definitely falling into the type 4 category. And anytime we play against these recreational opponents, we have to understand that they're going to be playing quite differently from what our baseline strategy is. So it's worth the time and effort to devote energy to observing their play and looking at what their strategy is. Even if that's what we deem to be an inferior strategy, it's still beneficial to us to observe and understand this strategy so we can figure out the best way to beat it. So this type 4 opponent 3-betting on the button here to 40K, choosing a good size. Looks like I'm here in the big blind, queen 10 suited, terrible haircut. I think I'm going to fold. And back to Mike Linster, 6-4 clubs. Probably should fold this hand at a final table, 4-handed. I think he's sitting 3 of 4. The other guy is shorter. Not really a spot we're looking to get involved against the chip leader. Could probably even make a case for open folding it instead of raising to begin with. But he does open this hand and does call the 3-bet. And his hand not super relevant in this scenario because we are focusing on the other player and this type 4 opponent, how he proceeds with aces on this queen jack 5 flop. And the name of the game here is bet sizing. So with 96K in the middle, we're very curious to how he's going to choose his size. And most of the time, players not really mixing sizes, these recreational players probably doing the same thing most of the time. And he does bet 100K into a pot of 96K with aces, and a full pot bet here with a good hand is a useful data point. While on its own it doesn't do too much for us. Maybe he 3-bets. Maybe in 3-bet pots he always continues for pot or something like that. But while not useful on its own, when pieced together with other pieces of data, and if we can keep observing this player and finding out more about how they play different parts of their range, this could potentially be a very useful data point and one we can build a strategy around. So looking at the next piece of the puzzle, and this hand coming against the same opponent who we've now reached the heads-up stage of the tournament and are playing against with something around a 4-1 chip deficit, but still playing fairly deep, I think 40, 50 blinds here. And I'm coming in with a min raise at 1600 to 32K with ace-jack offsuit, and our type 4 loose recreational player does defend. And pretty standard stuff here, pre-flop, nothing out of the ordinary. And Remembering our point from before on how we saw that pot size bet with pocket aces, I'm now keeping a very close eye on how he's choosing his sizes in different spots, keeping in mind that oftentimes these type 4 players are not choosing their bet sizes based on board texture or thinking about their whole range, but more specifically on their exact hand strength in that moment. So as we proceed for something around 40% half pot and get called here, we flop top pair. We get the 8 of spades on the turn with 6-7 completing, and opponent, our type 4 villain, now choosing to lead into us on this turn. And we're going to keep an eye on this sizing choice here as he bets what looks like 45K into 134. So something on the order of 30% lead here. And we don't have too much of a decision with ace jack really on any street here, but not going to fold against an opponent like this who will tend to bluff a lot of turns and rivers with hands they probably should not. I prefer calling over raising here, so I do call on the turn, and believe we get a backdoor flush complete here on the river with the 5 of spades. We're holding the ace of spades, which is great. And seeing what our opponent does here after leading the turn, now leads again here on the river, but only for 60K into a pot of 225K. So something on the order of quarter pot here, which is, I think, just a snap call as our opponent goes into the muck. But worth noting that now we have 2 data points where, 1, we've seen him bet pot with a very good hand. 2, we've seen him bet 30% turn, 25% river with a bluff. And as we're putting together the pieces and watching more hands, we're looking for things to corroborate that theory that we have that villain is basing his bet sizes off of the strength of his hand and not any kind of fundamental board texture or range calculation that he's doing. So now that we have these 2 pieces, and later in the heads up match, now we've kind of evened stacks here, and we have this very confident read that we know what our opponent is doing with different parts of his range and choosing his sizes. How do we exploit that, and how far can we go in using that bet sizing tell to change our strategy and how we're going to react to different bets? So this hand coming at 12K, 24K, villain opening to 60 here on the button with Queen 7 offsuit, computer hand. And I'm going to defend Ace 7 offsuit here in the big blind. Pretty standard stuff pre-flop. And again, with these type 4 opponents, especially in a big spot like this, when you get heads up against an opponent you believe you have a big edge on, always in your best interest to keep the pots small pre-flop and keep the stack to pot ratio as high as you can. Put them to as many decision points as you can post-flop. Make them play flops, turns, and rivers, as theoretically every decision they're going to make should be putting more money into your pocket, especially with as we collect more data and really understand what our opponents are doing, our win rate should go even higher. So that's kind of the basis of our strategy heads up to really keep the pot small pre-flop and then use this bet sizing tell the best we can to navigate post-flop. So here with 125 in the middle, villain bets 75K on the bigger side, something around 60%, and ace 7 with the ace of hearts, a little too strong to fold. I do call. And that bet size on its own, not telling us too much as it falls in the middle. Important to me that it was not a pot size bet, as I would expect villain to bet hands like top pair or better for an even bigger size. So although that is not a small bet, it still gives us some immediate information on where he was at on the flop, given our prior knowledge of how he plays. So we get this jack of clubs on the turn here. Not a good turn for our hand, but we do face a bet of 100K into a pot of 230. So, or actually 270. So this something like a 40% pot bet, and a spot where I'm certainly going to fold for a bigger bet. I think anything 200K pot bet, easy fold against this opponent. But versus the smaller bet, I'm still confident that my ace high might be good, and thinking that on a lot of rivers facing another small bet, I'll have a potential hero call with ace high, and 8 of diamonds comes in here, filling out some straights. really ugly looking board for our hand, the ace-7, as almost all combos make pairs. I suppose versus some opponents we could consider check raise bluffing. We do have 6-7 interaction, 7-9 blocking some straights. Versus this opponent, I didn't really consider check raise bluffing here too much, just because if he did have a value hand, there wouldn't be much of a decision. I know he would call even with a one pair type hand. But versus this 200K, this another 40% pot bet on the river, I'm really putting a lot of weight in the sizing choice and what we've seen earlier in the tournament, in basing my decision off of that more than any kind of range or fundamental calculation in what he might have, where I'm less concerned about his exact holdings, more on the fact that he's betting small. I believe he has a weak hand. I believe he's likely bluffing. So keeping it simple and using that bet sizing tell that we've collected earlier in the tournament to make a big hero call and take control of this heads-up match. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed that little breakdown of how I attack these types of players and things we can exploit in the power of observation and really understanding what opponents are doing, what their tactics are at the table, and how we can pick up on their patterns and win the most money as possible. And that's really something that's a big part of my upcoming course, talking about how we play most profitably against different player types and focusing on how to observe these types of players, the power of collecting data and building player profiles, or really things that are vital to tournament poker and your success in those games. So hope you guys keep an eye out for that upcoming course. We're going to have one more video coming out next week with another little strategical breakdown, and I hope to see you guys soon.